As always, my name is Gregory Stanek. An important skill for geoscientists to have is the ability to positively identify minerals in hand samples and thin sections under a petrographic microscope. This is so that they can better understand conditions that led to the formation of these minerals inside the rocks. In this week's lab, we're going to discuss the carbonates, the sulfates, the tungstates, and the phosphates group from chapter 29, and the native elements, the sulfides and the sulfosalts from chapter 23. Underneath the carbonates, we're going to further break them down into the calcite group, the aragonite group, and the dolomite group. In the lab, we only saw one example in the hand samples of the carbonates group, which was calcite, a part of the calcites group. Calcites are going to show perfect rhombohedral cleavage. When we looked at the hand sample of calcite, it had perfect rhombohedral cleavage, a hardness of 3, and a very light color which helped us identify it. The other two groups, the aragonite group and the dolomite group, while we didn't see examples of them in the lab, it's still important to know how to identify them. The aragonite group is going to have orthombic cleavage, and it's going to have a very high specific gravity. The dolomites are a 3-end member composition, the first being dolomite with calcium-magnesium dicarbonate. The other end is anchorite, which is calcium-iron dicarbonate, and kutnerite, calcium-manganese dicarbonate. Next, we looked at members from the sulfates group. The sulfates group is going to be characterized by a hardness of about 3 to 3.5, with gypsum being the only exception with the hardness of 2. They're also very easily recognized by a flame test, which is done by creating a powder by scratching the mineral, and then taking it and throwing it into a flame and seeing what color the flame is. The first mineral we looked at in the sulfates group was gypsum, which again is recognized by its hardness of 2. It's also very recognizable because it's white. The next mineral we looked at was barite, which has very tabular crystals, a hardness of 3, putting it in the sulfate group, has orthombic crystals, and has a very high specific gravity. The last mineral we looked at in the sulfate group was celestite, which is going to resemble barite but have a lower specific gravity, and also be very pale and blue. The next group was the phosphates group, which we looked at apatite. Apatite has a hardness of 5, hexagonal crystal structure, and a vitreous luster, which helps us identify it. Among the tungstate group, we didn't actually see any examples of this, but the only important one is the scheelites. In the lab for chapter 30, we identified members of the native elements. Native elements include gold, silver, copper, sulfur, diamond, and graphite. Gold, silver, and copper, as I'm sure you've all seen, have isometric crystals as well as a very high specific gravity and a metallic luster, which makes them easy to identify. Sulfur has yellow crystals as well as having a very distinct odor to it. Diamond is chiefly characterized by having very high hardness of 10. Graphite, which we saw in the lab, has a greasy feel to it and a hardness of about 1 to 2, which makes it easy to write on paper, as well as having a low specific gravity. There are 4 members of the sulfide group which may be confused with gold if you don't look carefully. The first is pyrite, which is known as fool's gold. It's easily distinguished from gold by having a hardness of about 6 to 6.5, while gold has a hardness much lower than that. Chalcopyrite, another one that may be confused with gold, and also with pyrite, is distinguished by having a green to black streak and being able to be scratched by a steel nail. Peridotite is very magnetic, and none of the other 4 are. Pentlandite, the last one, has octahedral pairing, which helps differentiate itself. Also in the sulfides group, we identified galena, which may look like graphite, except that it has a very cubic form and is easily recognized by it. The last mineral we looked at was spherulite, which has a resinous luster and perfect cleavage.